Awesome, thanks so much. I'm Evan Savage, and we've just heard two fantastic talks about using cosmochemistry to date the Earth itself and using plant genetics to understand the spread and propagation of invasive species. So you're all probably wondering, what weighty scientific topic am I going to grab? So you can probably see where this is going. I'm going to talk about people beating each other with foam swords. And in particular, I'm going to talk about a sport I play called Jugger for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Before I launch in too much to an explanation of that, I'm going to start just with a quick visual taste of what the sport looks like as it's played today.
Die Kontrolle in der Mitte. Start von Ariel, Minus von Lauf. Der Startplatz von den Sohnkindern. Zwischen 0 und 3 Punkte in der Mitte stehen.
It's a good time.
Ganz kleines Minus, aber immer aufstehen noch. Jonas gekriegt, Tobi gekriegt hat. Sonst hätte Tobi nämlich die ganzen Pins in der Mitte aufräumen können. Ja, die hatten wir schon mal gesehen. Ja. Sieht man vielleicht nicht auf der Kamera, aber
They even got announcers and everything. It's great. Awesome. So that is Jugger, the sport. It's a 5 versus 5 team field sport that's played with, you saw these sort of LARP-style buffer weapons, so padded foam swords, this big ball and a chain thing that people are swinging around, that people use to hit each other gently. It's played in over 30 countries across several continents. It came out of a post-apocalyptic B-movie from the 80s starring Rutger Hauer and also Joan Chen and Vincent D'Onofrio. Excellent movie, and by excellent I mean really, really kind of bad, but awesome. And it was adapted from the movie for play as a real-world sport by post-war punks in Berlin. And now you're probably wondering, wow, how did we get here? Like Rutger Hauer, post-war punks, and people are playing this around the world. And what is this exactly that you're talking about? Let's back up a tiny bit. I'm Evan Savage. I'm the treasurer on the board of Jugger Copenhagen, which is a local forening here in Copenhagen. Here's me with a bunch of our wonderful players. We have several of them in the audience today. Could I just get anyone with Jugger Copenhagen to raise their hand? So if you have questions, go up and ask them afterwards, or me. They would be more than happy to answer. Jugger Copenhagen, as you might be able to surmise, plays Jugger in Copenhagen. I probably don't need to explain the Copenhagen part too much, except to say that we meet in Fælledparken, 11 to 13 every Saturday. You should come, it's awesome. But I'm going to be focusing more on this Jugger part. You can see a bit of our play here. It's somewhat less expert than the sort of German championship finals match that you saw before. But what is Jugger exactly, and where did it come from? To help us make a bit of sense of this madness, I'm going to invent a taxonomy chart here, which is not going to be a quadrant chart because I'm not an academician, I can do whatever I want. And we're going to talk about what people do with foam swords, because as it turns out, there is a stunning variety of things that people do with foam swords in their hands. So I'm going to build up this taxonomy, and then I'm going to use it for the rest of the talk to talk about the evolution of Jugger, where its sort of inspirations came from, and how it's changed over the years. So one of the inspirations comes from a set of things called battle games. Here, it's sort of the focus is on simulated combat. Often battle gamers, they care a lot about where you get hit and how hard. You get hit in an arm, you lose the arm, and you have to walk around with your arm behind your back and pretend you have one arm. They'll practice formations. They have a whole lineup here. They're doing a whole fake battle. There's archers, there's fake fortifications, that whole thing. They're aiming for a kind of combat realism, and a lot of the rules and structure of it support that. This video happens to be taken from an annual battle event called Ragnarok, from a battle game called Dagger here, and they're engaged in some kind of large group battle. So that's battle gaming, and we'll put it down here in the bottom left. Then there's LARPing. Here the focus is on being in character. You're bringing characters, stories, worlds to life. Now I'm not going to go too much into detail about LARP. There's a lot of different traditions. It's wildly popular here in Denmark, and there's probably a lot of people who know a lot more about it than I do. This is a clip from a trailer of a campaign that an Aarhus-based LARP forening did called Første Sunday. And you can already see like they're building a whole world. In this world, the king has just died, and the realm is thrown into chaos. The soldiers have turned into brigands, so on and so forth. Who will save the day? So they're really building up a world that the players reinforce and develop through their actions. So we'll put that down there in the bottom right corner. And finally, we have sport. Now, you might quibble with the definition of this as sport. Here, the focus is nominally on physical ability. The rules of sport are typically designed for fair and safe competition and having a bit of silly fun while you're doing it. This is American Gladiator. It's a TV show that aired in the 90s. It was sort of the Ninja Warrior of its day, and they had this one event where they would stand up on these platforms and beat each other with these giant Q-tip looking things. And try to knock each other off with them. So that's more of a sport-oriented tradition, where it's like you're aiming for physical prowess. How hard can you hit someone with the stick while maintaining balance? That sort of thing. And we'll put it's just like stupid fun to watch. And we'll put sport up there in the top corner. So we have our taxonomy of stuff people do with foam swords, and we'll use that to describe the evolution of Jugger. So, where did this sport come from? I already alluded to a film. The film exists, and it was originally the brainchild of screenwriter David Webb Peoples. Now, this guy, back in the 70s, he watched a movie called Rollerball, which was another kind of post-apocalyptic, dystopian world in which sport is kind of this central feature of entertainment. And he'd always wanted to make a similar movie to sort of attribute the skill and ability of athletes. In 1982, he gets a chance to work on the screenplay of Blade Runner. You might have heard of this movie, I don't know. And this gives him enough fame and clout in the industry that he's finally able to take that and direct his own movie. He's able to bring this idea to life. So he sits down and he writes up the screenplay, in which Jugger is described as this kind of brutal blood sport. He hands the script over to the stunt coordinator, who takes that and brings the sport to life on screen. And so Jugger is born. It was released as the Salute of the Jugger originally, but of course the US, being America, needed a different and more violent name, the Blood of Heroes. And just to get a feel for Jugger as is depicted in the film, let's take a look at the movie trailer, because you really get a feel of it from that.
From the author of Blade Runner and Lady Hawk.
Jugger's coming! Jugger's coming! They're coming! They're coming!
In the future, Jugger. Outcast champions playing a game of survival. This is the story of Kitten, who has heard tales of a world far better than the one fate has given her.
Is there such a thing as self?
She will do anything.
I got speed, I can run. How quickly?
She will risk everything to beat one of the Jugger. It is the story of Sal, banished from a place of honor in the underground Red City because of a woman.
I like the blood of heroes.
Now, this woman will lead him back.
We could play a team from the lead.
So that's the film. Like I said, it's a B movie, so, you know, set your expectations accordingly if you plan to watch it. Get friends, drink beer. Let's talk about where this belongs here, because you see in the movie it's this brutal blood sport, right? They're wearing heavy armor, they're using these weapons that make this big clunk when they hit each other. You've got the coach on the sidelines and he's telling them to punish the other players. We're going to place it over here. It's a sport, it's got heavy elements of combat simulation, so it's kind of halfway in between sport and battle gaming. And that's where the sport originally comes from. Now, here in Denmark, you would have been some of the lucky few who could have seen this in 1989. Lucky few. Along with South Korea, Australia, and I think Italy. Yeah, Italy. You know, I guess at the time you could have tried to pirate it over your 9600 or 4800 baud modem or whatever. It would take fucking forever. You'd probably still be waiting for it. But you could try. Now, remember that this is 1989. We've got a post-apocalyptic movie depicting a kind of underdog struggle, a myriad bunch of outcasts who are trying to sort of struggle and get somewhere against the fucked up world they find themselves in. And this movie gets released in West Germany about 2 months after the Berlin Wall comes down. The post-wall punks in Berlin are watching this, and it really just strikes a chord. They're like, hey, you know what? We're a mixed bunch of, of underdogs who are trying to make sense of the fucked up world around us. Let's just do this. Let's make this a real world thing. And so they do. And by 1992, there's a growing set of clubs across Germany. You've got Berlin, but you've also got Hamburg and Lübeck and Heidelberg. Everywhere except Berlin, this development is being led by a lot of local LARP communities. But, you know, obviously Jugger is a bit more like, it's a bit more sporty in the movie, so they sort of meet halfway and they make a thing that some people have referred to as LARP sport. You can see the influence of LARP mechanics in the development of Jugger outside Berlin, so there's other groups there. One example of this is hitting strength. Has anyone here participated in a LARP or any kind of battle gaming kind of thing? Yeah, so you might have been exposed to mechanics through that you have to hit with a certain strength. If you don't hit with a certain strength, you can't hear it or feel it, it doesn't count because you're supposed to be making it like you're actually striking with the weapon. So they have this in the Hamburg LARP sport rules. In modern play, we don't do that. We just first touch. And as you've seen from the first clip that we watched at the beginning, that does lead to a much faster pace of play. So let's get LARP sport up on the taxonomy here. It's half LARP and half sport, and so let's just put it there about halfway between the two. Pretty straightforward. Meanwhile, the post-wall punks in Berlin are being post-wall punks in Berlin. They're playing Jugger every week. They're bringing all kinds of weird, eclectic, wonderful people into the mix. You know, there maybe are some people who also are involved in LARP communities there. But there's a pretty wide and diverse mix, including a few of the people who go on to found the legendary Berlin hackerspace Seabase in 1995. And because of that connection, Seabase sort of takes up Jugger as kind of an official, unofficial, you know, as official as anything gets there, sport of the hackerspace. And they're continuing to play every week. Before long, one thing leads to another. You know, you've got a bunch of weird geeks who already like organizing things into associations, so they make another association, Jugger EV, in 1997. This is the world's first formally registered Jugger sport association. And just a year later, so it's really like clockwork, a year later, 1998, the first Deutschen Juggermeisterschaft takes place, the German Jugger Championship. Here's some footage of early Berlin Jugger. You can actually see up in the corner, contributed by someone at Seabase. There's still vestiges of LARP influence. The guy's got a drinking horn. There's people in funny costumes and stuff, right? But it's definitely moving in a bit more of a sport direction. You can already see this. Then as now, each team has a runner or a quick, and that's the only person on each team who can pick up the ball and run with it. And they're doing all kinds of like dodges, dives, they're tackling each other, even the moves from the other people. There's a lot of lunges, a lot of athletic looking moves here. Yeah, and a lot of rolling on the ground, because why not, right? And so Berlin Jugger, from the get-go, has a tiny bit more of a sport-oriented feel than the LARP sport variant that's being played by the other German groups. Meanwhile, you've got to remember that the Earth is a big place, and this movie was released in a bunch of places, and Germany, you know, they turned it into a sport, but they're not the only people who can do this, who can take a weird post-apocalyptic blood sport from a film and turn it into a thing people actually might want to play and survive. We don't know for sure when and where the first real-life game of Jugger was played. Now this is, again, 1989, 1990, slightly before the internet takes off, before we have photos and geotags of absolutely everything that ever happens. But there is a Reddit post on our Jugger, written several years later, that suggests that shortly after the US side release of the film in February 1990, some people decided, just getting right out of the movie theater, looking out at the vast Midwest flat fields of snow, that they really want to just jump in that snow and play Jugger right then and there. And so it's likely that sometime around there, whether it was on this side of the pond or the other, the first game of Jugger was played. And those early US Jugger players were part of a LARP tradition called AmpGuard, which is one of the most popular LARPs in the US. They've got groups that meet in a whole bunch of major cities and even less major cities. Pretty much everywhere you go in the US, you can find a group for this. To this day, AmpGuarders continue to play what they call AmpGuard Jugging as a sort of mini game alongside their LARPing activities. You can see an example of it here. There's some similarities to the early Berlin Jugger. They're running around a field and it's kind of chaotic and they're wearing funny costumes. There's no cool horn though. But they're still using the AmpGuard equipment and rules. You can see it. When they get struck in the leg, they lose the leg and they have to go down on one knee. And there's also like the minimum force hitting rule that you get in a lot of especially more combat-oriented LARPs. Also, players will often stay in their AmpGuard characters as they play AmpGuard Jugging. And so it really does make sense to place this down towards the LARP corner because again, you're using more of the LARP mechanics. You're bringing in more of the LARP role-playing, sort of LARP role-playing tradition there. This guy is great. The sport continues to pop up in new countries meanwhile. Australia joins the fray in 2000. And by 2002, they have their very first official rule set. And this official rule set explicitly mentions fairness and fun as two essential elements of the game because the Aussie Juggers are excellent people. And these are two things that I think Jugger clubs around the world can still agree upon to this day. And you also know Aussies, they love to have their own special rules for everything. So this guy, he's got, what is this? It's like a 3-balled chain. He's got like Thor's hammer in his other hand, and he looks really serious doing both of them. Neither of these objects are legal in modern Jugger, which might be kind of a shame. Nor were they legal in the German Jugger scene at the time, but they really do look cool. Later on, around 2008, 2010, that sort of era, there's also a new variant of the sport, armored Jugger, that pops up in a couple of places. In the Czech Republic and Poland, Juggers start putting on heavier armor and hitting each other a little less gently. So, okay, you've seen a lot of these videos by now. You've seen a lot of people running around fields. Your eyes are probably glazing over from like, okay, this person has a different funny costume. Bear with me. You can see they're bringing in a bit more of the post-apocalyptic vibe here now, right? There's a bit more like Mad Max Thunderdome feeling going on. They're bringing back that sense of the movie. And there's also a lot more padding and armor than the other variants. They're going a bit rougher. There's a lot more emphasis on just kind of beating the stuffing out of each other. Around the same time, in the deserts of California, the post-apocalyptic Wasteland Festival, yes, this is a thing, there's a festival for everything, including post-apocalyptic stuff. They decide to make Jugger a new addition to their event festival, their sort of event lineup. Similar to the Czech Jugger, they've got padding, as you can see there. And this is America, so they've also got American football helmets so they can do even more violence because America. Yeah, way to ruin the narrative here.
There were football helmets also.
Yeah, they're inclusive in their sport helmet wearing, it's true. And all of this, the Czech Jugger, the Polish Jugger, the Wasteland Jugger, we can lump it in under a category of armored Jugger because they're wearing more armor than you would normally need to for a sport. It's also much closer in spirit to the film. In many ways, it's almost an attempt to return to those roots, to return to the sort of original style and tradition, and not quite the same brutality because you would actually lose players, but to bring some of that back. And that all finally brings us to the modern era of Jugger. So we'll see this clip again as it's played today. This clip is from the 2019 Deutsche Jugger Meisterschaft. That's the same tournament series that was played first in 1998 in Berlin, continues to this day. Here we have the top teams, Riga Modus and Sonnenkinder, playing in the finals. And just to look at it again, the thing that you notice in comparison to a lot of the other videos is just how fast and acrobatic the play is. There's dives, there's sprints, there's crazy like blocks where you're doing this and then immediately going out and this guy's all over the place. This is the result of nearly 30 years of Jugger developing in a more and more sporty direction over time. And it's also the result of, now that more and more players have started to play, you have a higher skill differential between the top and the sort of average teams. So you get a lot of this really like higher level play. So modern Jugger belongs right up there in the sport corner. More than any other variant we've seen, it really focuses on that fast athletic play. But that being said, this is still the entire space that we're dealing with here is still stuff people do with foam swords. It's all influenced in some sense by the stuff at the bottom two corners of the triangle. Right? They've left their mark on this activity just as on other activities like it. We still use foam swords, for instance, something like this, which is something that, again, was sort of popularized by the LARP and battle gaming traditions. The same combat skills, the field awareness that you would find useful in a battle game, useful here in Jugger. And also, there's even though there aren't really role-playing elements to the sport itself, people do still kind of bring bits and pieces of that. People will often, a lot of the players in their jersey, they have their own sort of jersey name they put on it, and they would refer to each other by that jersey name when they're at tournaments. And you also see a lot of cool jersey designs from the community, so teams expressing themselves through that. I think Valkyrie over there is also wearing one of the other jerseys. Which is kind of, in some way, it does harken back to the costuming and heraldry that's characteristic of LARPs. And of course, Jugger continues to evolve to this day, growing into more and more countries and communities as we speak. And just as Jugger started with 2 different rule sets in different parts of Germany, there's all kinds of rule sets across the world now. I might personally believe that the sport, as a sport, would benefit from one international rule set. But I also think this is kind of a wonderful point in the development of the sport, because it is a reminder that those of us in the community are playing a thing, we're involved in a thing that is still growing and evolving. And in a way, it's also very true to that sort of punk anarchist tradition right back to those post-wall punks in Berlin, because of course, who are any of us to tell the rest how we are supposed to play Jugger? It's very ansloen in a way. Du skal tro, at du kan lære os noget. You should not think that you can teach us anything. All of that being said, if you do want us to teach you something about Jugger, Jugger Copenhagen meets every Saturday from 11 to 13 in Fælledparken, just near the Trianglen Station Metro. New players are always, always, always welcome. We love to teach new players. It's a lot of fun. You do not need to know how to play to show up and play on our field. So I definitely encourage you to come out, give it a try, and be part of this weird and wonderful and growing sport. Here's a load of resources if you want to know more. There's our Facebook page. Some of the research from this talk, came actually from this book, which was written by a German player who started a club in Sweden. It's a convoluted story, I know. But there are actually a lot of people in the community who are sort of, I would say almost like amateur chroniclers or historians of the sport. So if you want to know more about that, I can find some way to share those resources with all of you in the NerdNet community. And with that, thank you for coming to my session. Okay, all right, let's just go left to right. Here's
thank you, that was very interesting. You mentioned a little bit German to Sweden. There was this slide with the flags. Is that some sort of phylogeny? You didn't describe the details of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually, if you go into this page, that's, there's supposed to be a laser pointer on this. That's this one here. And It's someone went and gathered together all of the rule books in the different communities and made an attempt to sort of, yeah, exactly this. Think about which ones are descendants of others, in a sense. So, yes, you could say that it is a phylogeny of rule books of the sport of Jugger, to the extent that you can do such a thing. Yeah, there really are a lot of, yeah, I guess just looking at this further, I mean, obviously Germany has the longest unbroken line here, but you've also got the Australian group here. There is a tradition of American Jugger going back pretty far as well. Spain is also quite active, so they have quite an active community there. Art.
How long is a game and how do you score?
How do you score? Okay, so let's talk first about how you score. When you are, let me see if I can pull up. Yeah, so on this field, you can see there's that person there just put the ball into the goal. I'll just rewind that again so you can see. Basically, it's a 5 versus 5 team field sport. On each team, there's one runner. They're the only person who can pick up the ball, and to score, they have to place it in the opponent's goal, to put it down while they're in control of it, take their hand off, and yell jug. That's a point. Everyone else has these foam swords or chains, and they're fighting to make space for their runner to score. When you get tagged by a chain or a weapon, you go down for a certain amount of time, after which you can get back up again and join the match. So how long a game takes is actually an interesting question, because it used to be, so during a game, you'll have at the side of the field, there'll usually be a speaker, and the speaker plays a beat every second and a half. This is sort of a global timer for the game, so that when players go down, they can use that beat to count off a number of beats until they get back up again. It used to be that a game would be 2 halves of 100 of those beats.